Hey everybody, Mr. Anderson here again. This is the video tip session for the synthesis essay on the AP exam. Like I've said with all the other ones we've done, this is going to be geared more towards people who want to make sure they get into that 6 range, which is kind of where we want to be at a minimum. If you are already in the 7, 8, 9 range, this may not apply to you, although maybe it will. Basically what this is going to be is how you should go about organizing your time and your approach on exam day. It's less about writing the essay than it is about planning the essay, because this is one I think where if you don't have that planning component, you will mess yourself up. And we're going to break it down into some steps, and these are similar to the steps that we talked about in class, but you can see them right here. The first one is read the prompt. And we're going to go back and get these in detail, but I'll hit them all now. We're going to read the prompt mostly because we want to be sure of what the prompt is asking. A lot of the time on the synthesis essay, especially, the actual question can be quite obscure. You're also going to double check the number of required sources. It's almost always 3. I don't think I've ever seen a year where it hasn't been 3, but who knows, they might try to mess with you, so make sure it is still minimum 3 sources. You can, of course, do more, but you don't get extra points for that. Second thing is we're going to find the non-textual source. They almost always will give you, in fact, I will go on a limb and say they will always give you some kind of chart or political cartoon or graph or something like that. And what you want to do is you want to find that first. Now, again, you don't have to, but if you are looking for specific strategies to help you on test day, the very first thing you should do when you look at the sources is not read them all, but to flip through the sources and look and find the one that's the non-textual source. Look at that one and process it first, and then you're going to go back and think about that non-textual source. Let's say it's a cartoon. You're going to think about, let's say the cartoon was source B. You're going to go back and say, okay, what would source A think about the cartoon? What would source C think about the cartoon? What would source D? And so as you're doing your reading, you're actually already starting your synthesis. You're already starting your conversation. So that will help you with the note-taking, but that's also going to help you with the essay structure. If you're not sure about how to organize your essay, I mean, a very simple way would be to start by asking what the first source would say about the cartoon, then say what you think, then ask what the next source would say about the cartoon, then say what you think. It sounds very simple, but that's 2 solid body paragraphs right there. When you're reading the sources, remember, you only need to have minimum 3, I hope. So if you are reading a source and you can't figure out how it's going to fit into your argument or even why they gave it to you, you don't need to use that source. You could just completely throw it away, with one caveat that I'll talk about at the very end. But remember, you only need 3, so if you're understanding 3 sources and know how to use them, move on. Clear thesis. This is going to be important, especially if the question they gave you in the prompt is confusing, but it's also going to be important because tip number 6, as you see, rather tip number 5, you want to tie everything back to the thesis. So if your thesis is clear, you know what it is that you're trying to prove. You can remind your audience I'm proving that every single time. The general organization for the body paragraphs on the synthesis essay, and again, this is only for people who are struggling for, how do I do it? I would say every body paragraph, should start with a conversation between 2 of the sources at least, a resolution phase where you say, okay, this is who's right and this is why, or this is what we can learn from this conversation. And then as the final sentence of your body paragraph, you tie it back to the thesis. You explain why it proves your thesis. In general, you just want to avoid one-source paragraphs, and this is good advice for everybody. It's hard to avoid summarizing on the synthesis essay, but you need to avoid summarizing. It's one of the specific things they want to see you not do, is not just say, here's what this source said, but rather to use that source. So if you have a paragraph with just one source, that the danger is there. But remember, of course, source you, is okay. So if you have a paragraph where you're not just summarizing the source, but actually kind of questioning its data or questioning its motives or questioning some of its assumptions, that's fine. That's source you interacting with that source. And finally, we talked about easy ways to structure your essay. As a last paragraph, a really effective way to make sure you're continuing to do synthesis and to close up your essay is if there's a source that seems to be against what you're arguing, you can make your last paragraph a rebuttal or a refutation of that source. And then once again, you're doing synthesis. If you can't find a source that clearly refutes what you're talking about, I will talk about that at the end of this talk as well. All right, so those are our rules. Those should seem pretty familiar from class. So now what I would like you to do is actually pause this video and go and find what I found here on the AP Central exam, AP Central website, and you type Langen Comp. You can get all the questions from all the past years. We're going to click on free response questions right here. And we're going to pull up this packet from 2004, and you're going to read this synthesis essay. I'm not going to read the whole thing out loud, so go ahead and pause this. Remember to read the prompt, and come back when you are ready to go. Wow, you're back. Okay, so let's start by reading the prompt here just to make sure that we see what it's saying. I will say, looking at the sources and this prompt, this is one of the more straightforward prompts they give you. But remember, they're not all going to be like this. We've seen some in class where the question is quite obscure, and even sometimes the sources don't seem to make any sense with what they're asking you. So it says right here, many recent college graduates have faced record levels of unemployment. This situation has led people to question what they value about higher education. Some high school students and their parents are wondering if a college education is worth the cost. Others, however, believe that a college education prepares students for more than just a job or career. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Then synthesize information from at least, how many? 3, no surprise, but we're double checking 3 of the sources, and incorporate it into a coherent, well-developed essay that evaluates whether college is worth the cost. And they like to do this, right? They kind of shove the question at the end of a sentence, so it's not standing out there, but they want you to take a stand on whether or not college is worth the cost. So like I said, that's a pretty clear prompt, and we want to make sure we answer with a clear thesis, basically a yes or no. And if you're going to be kind of qualifying that, you want to be very strong about the reason you're qualifying it. So our first step was to find the non-textual source. And so I'm going to talk us through here what I might do if I was going to write this essay. So here's our non-textual source, and we want to be careful when we read it, because what it's doing there is it's giving you 2 lines, and you might think that this is comparing, non-college graduates to college graduates, and it shows that college graduates make more money, but it's actually not showing that, and this may be what they're kind of checking. This is the difference between men and women who have college degrees and how much they make. And this difference, while appalling, is not really the topic of the essay. So make sure you're reading the chart correctly. What this does show is that the wage of the average college graduate for entry level, that's when you first start out, and that might be important, by the way, entry level, has been going down since a high point and is stagnating. So remember, what we do now, we have that, and the first question we ask is, what would source A think about that chart? Now, if you read this, you'll see that source A is from a writer in an article which is really advocating for not going to college, or at least for learning how to do things where you work with your hands. So what might this person say about the chart? Well, he doesn't talk very much about money, but what he does talk about is he says that right here, systemic changes in the economy arising from information technology that have the surprising effect of making the manual trades, plumbing, electrical work, car repair more attractive as careers. So what he might say is, yeah, not only is the wage for college level or college graduate entry level wages, not only has that stagnated, but you can make a very good career with something like plumbing where you don't necessarily have to go to college. He would also point out, though, that again, if you were having a conversation with this author, he might say, the issue really isn't money. It's more about this kind of spiritual engagement. And he gives this nice quote here about how in schools we create artificial learning environments that children know to be contrived and undeserving of their full attention and engagement. Without the opportunity to learn through the hands, the world remains abstract and distant, and the passions for learning will not be engaged. So he would say 2 things about that chart. A, yeah, the money's bad. it's not as good as we think it is, and you can make a good living as a plumber. And B, let's not even worry necessarily about money, because we should also be thinking about the development of the person and all the passions that are lost when we force people into college. So right there, everybody, I've kind of written my first paragraph. If I was going to be planning this out, by only reading 2 sources, I already have a quite an interesting first paragraph. And here I'll kind of do a rough outline for you about what I would write. And in my first paragraph, I would say, source A talks about chart. And there are 2 things we said there. He's going to talk about C, money, not such a big deal. But then also he's going to say, money shouldn't be the point anyway, and plumbers equal joy, or something like that. So that's a great first paragraph. I've already started synthesizing. I've got 2 interesting points that came out of my synthesis, but then the other thing I've got to remember to do, since this is my intro paragraph, is what I need to have a clear thesis. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, you would have to kind of take a side. Maybe you want to read the other sources first to see, which side has more support. But honestly, you'll write a better essay if you say what you really believe. Now, what I happen to believe is I agree with this person about the importance of college careers, and I think that he's right that we lose a lot when we don't have, working with our hands and seeing the results of our labor. I think that's all a good point. But one thing that I would jump in and say, if I was looking at that chart, is that, we pull up the chart again, this chart shows us that college wages have gone down, but it doesn't show how much higher college wages are than non-college wages. And ultimately, I think that while some people can make a great living with manual labor, the data out there just shows there's such a loss in income that it just doesn't make up for the possible benefits of not going to college. So that would be my thesis. I would say here, thesis, what the chart doesn't show, and we need money, tough luck. So now I have a thesis, and now I can, go back and look at some of the other sources that I've read, and I can see if there's any other things I could use to help me. So if I compared source B to the chart, I think source B would probably talk about how, the importance of as it says, a liberal arts education, and how you can, down here, for talking about the chart and talking about money, it says many liberal arts students become innovators and productive risk takers, translating liberal arts ideas into effective, productive work in the field. That is what a liberal arts education is good for. He also talks about carrying the experience of college from campus to community. So these are some of those other benefits of college. And up here, I think this, where he says a successful liberal arts education develops the capacity for innovation and for judgment. Those who can image how best to reconfigure existing resources and project future results will be the shapers of our economy and culture. The habits of mind developed in a liberal arts context often result in a combination of focus and flexibility that makes for intelligent, sometimes courageous risk-taking for critical assessments of those risks. So this person might point out that while the entry-level wages on this chart, as we said, remember, entry-level, they may not be as high as they used to be. What the liberal arts gives you is an opportunity to not only expand your earning as you kind of go through life. You can sort of do more and expand what you're able to do, and gives you more possibility. But it also, some of his quotes in here, also kind of answers source A's problems about people who aren't engaged. So if I'm talking now about a second paragraph, I can use source B to confirm college good in long run, and then I could point out the graph is only for entry level. But I could also say that he refutes the claim of source A that college takes away joy, satisfaction, etc. So now I've actually got three sources talking to each other all at once. I've got source B looking at the chart, but also responding to what source A said. And again, I need to remember to tie it back to the thesis. So at the end of this paragraph, I'm going to go back and say, ultimately what we need to be concerned about, and ultimately college is worth the money because of the earning potential it gives you. So that would be my process here, and I've already kind of done the minimum that's required for answering this question because I've already used three sources. Now, talking about sources that don't necessarily fit in with what you're talking about, I was a bit thrown with what I was supposed to do with source, let's see, source E, which was talking about the guy who gave people $100,000 to not go to college. I was having trouble with it because I wasn't sure what it was supposed to prove. I mean, this guy clearly thinks that college isn't that important, but at the same time, he's giving $100,000 to people, which sort of offsets the financial loss that average people would have if they didn't go to college. So it seems like a very artificial situation. And if you couldn't think of any way to fit this into your essay, I just wouldn't worry about it. Move on. The second you realized it wasn't working for you, move on. They did give you a wonderful kind of final source here with a bunch of different statistics here that you could use, and they're from all kind of varieties of areas when it comes to money that you can kind of pick and choose from to strengthen your essay. So if I was writing my essay, I might go on to a third paragraph here. A third paragraph where I really dig into source E. This was source E, right? So, excuse me, source F. More evidence for financial gain. Now, here we got to remember one of our rules, which is no one-source paragraphs, right? So we want to avoid simply looking at source F and saying, look at all this great data it gave us, because then we're not really doing any synthesis. So when in doubt, you can go back to the chart. And this would take, some understanding of wage growth and all that kind of stuff. You need to read the chart a little more carefully. But you could talk about source F as responding to the trends that he saw, that they saw in source C. So, for example, down here it says, while Americans value college, they value character even more. Ask what it takes for a young person to succeed in the world. 61% say a good work ethic is extremely important, and 57% say about the same about knowing how to get along with people. Just 42% say the same about a college education. So this would seem to suggest, right, that a college education in a lot of people's minds isn't that important. But then, if you look at source C, and you point out the amount of money people are making, and you combine that with this statistic here about people who say that college was a good investment for them personally and maybe monetary payoff, then you're talking about a bunch of different factors. So you see what we would do there is we would start with something in source F that seems to be against us, and then use another part of source F, and maybe the chart as well, to say why no, actually college is still quite important. So that's what I mean when I say no one source paragraph. You don't just want to summarize what's an F. You want to actually interact with that. So to wrap things up here, we want to talk about that final paragraph. And I said a good place to start would be to refute somebody who seems to be against you. Now, the clear source that seems to be anti-college is this confusing one, source E. So I don't want to, use that because I'm not sure what to do with it. But I know that source A was definitely anti-college. Now, I've already talked about source A, but there's no reason you can't bring back source A again and use it for a refutation. So what I would do at this point is I would go into source A, I would pick some specific quotes from here that I haven't used yet, and I would maybe pick one or two of them, and then me, Mr. Anderson, source U, would respond to each of this person's quotes as a refutation and also as a conclusion. Refute source A, pick new quotes. I said there was one little caveat I wanted to use here as a piece of advice when it comes to conclusions. And that is, if you've written a really good essay so far, and let's say you've still got 10 minutes left of the time you've set up for the synthesis essay, another good strategy for conclusions, if not a refutation, is to spend your conclusion struggling with a confusing source. So all those things I was saying about source E and the guy who gives $100,000 to people to not go to college, all those kind of contradictions in there, that might be a good way to do a conclusion as well, because that sort of shows you taking the knowledge that you've done in the essay and trying to kind of stretch it. And that's what conclusions are, supposed to do, stretch and think of the next frontier of what you've been talking about in the essay so far. So that's an option if there isn't a clear source that's opposing you to refute. All right, well, so like we said, this is not the directions for how to do a perfect synthesis essay. This is more advice for how to go about that pre-writing process and how you can, right from the get-go, by picking that non-textual source, make sure you're starting synthesis during your note-taking phase, and that will really help you out. And you can even use that as a way to structure your essay, that kind of anchor text. Now, if you don't want to use the cartoon, or maybe there is no cartoon, God forbid, you can still do that same technique if you pick maybe the source that to you was the clearest, the strongest, the easiest to understand, and use that as the anchor source, and have the other ones bounce off that source as you move throughout the essay. That's still a good technique, even if you don't have a non-textual source. Okay, well, I hope you found this helpful, and that's our final video for the AP exam essays. You can always come talk to me if you have any specific questions, and I wish everybody good luck. All right, thanks, bye.